Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to the very first episode of Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents here on OpenShift TV. Today we're joined by the one and only Scott McBrien, and he has brought on a very special guest. Scott, would you like to introduce yourself and then maybe hand it off to our special guest to introduce themselves?
Sure. So my name is Scott McBrien. I work on the Red Hat Enterprise Linux team. And if all goes well today, I may in fact be the host for this show. We'll see. And today I have brought with me the Director of Product Marketing for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Mr. Gunnar Hellekson.
No pressure.
Actually, Director of Product Marketing. Did I get a promotion? No. So I'm that's your boss, Scott.
I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah.
Product management.
Ooh.
Oh,
It's rough. It's rough.
Wow.
I'm not hiring.
First show jitters.
this is what happens when I don't write things down, Gunnar.
No, I'm Gunnar Hellekson. I'm the director for product and strategy for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Yeah.
Awesome. It's great to have you both on. I'm super excited about this show as it's, I've worn my special Sutton Force 1 shirt. I'm very,
Don't
very,
think I didn't notice.
I'm very,
I appreciate it.
I have been in the Red Hat ecosystem since the 90s, and I've been at Red Hat for 2 years now, and I'm just like tickled to just be here to just have this job and also to be talking to the both of you because I've used Linux forever, and it's pretty much been RHEL.
Nice. Well, appreciate the service.
Thank you. We already have a question.
Okay.
Never mind.
Well, I have a question for Gunnar.
You have a question.
Yes.
All right.
Because I already know his answers, but I'm gonna interrogate him anyway, and maybe make him slip up a little bit. So Gunnar, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.3 released in beta in July 28th.
Yep.
Any guidance of when we'll see GA for RHEL 8.3?
Yeah, so there was a time in the life of Red Hat Enterprise Linux when your guess, Scott, would be as good as mine. Sometimes it felt like when we set the calendar for it, it was like we threw darts, and sometimes it would be in July, and other times it would be in August, and the rest of it. And one of the promises we made ourselves when we released RHEL 8 was that we were going to move to a consistent cadence, and I can talk about why maybe in a little bit, but. Basically now every major release comes out every 3 years, every minor comes out every 6 months. And so I can say with near moral certainty that Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.3 is going to come out in November 2020. We've kept to the schedule so far. I think we can stick with it.
Near moral certainty is a new level of certainty on this show.
Notice I didn't, not moral certainty, is near moral. I'm still a product manager, so I give myself a little.
There you go. Yeah. Wow.
So if RHEL 8.3 is coming out in November 2020, what does that mean for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9?
Yeah, so 3 years from the GA of RHEL 8. So it should be what was that? Early
spring 2022?
Yeah, something like it's just under 600 days, if my math is right. Not that I'm counting.
Yeah, do you have a clock somewhere counting that down for you right in front of you?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. The lead of engineering, Mike McGrath, actually does have a digital clock behind him in every video call, which is like it's this constant presence of like counting down the hours and minutes and seconds. Yeah,
that's amazing.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
Yeah. So this new release cadence for RHEL 8 and RHEL 9 is new, right? Because before we used to just kind of about right. Why did you decide to make this change with Red Hat Enterprise Linux?
Oh yeah. So I joked about throwing darts, and while that's definitely what the felt experience was like, there was actually method to the madness. So if you think about what an operating system has to do, its first and most important job is to light up all the hardware underneath it. And so that means that the RHEL schedule is very closely tied up with the schedule of shipping hardware, right? Because we don't want to release a major new version of RHEL and like miss a major new Intel architecture, right? Or like miss a major new piece of hardware, because then people would have to wait for the next release before we turn it on. And so my colleague Susan Denham, who runs the partner engineering team for RHEL, you can think about her like pasting every NDA roadmap in the industry up on a huge wall and looking for like one piece of white space. And she, so she would look there and she'd be like, RHEL 7, right about there, right? That's the sweet spot where we're going to like slide into the schedule and enable as many people as possible without being disruptive. But over the last like 5 years, the hardware industry has just gotten so, I don't want to say chaotic, but there are so many new players. It is so, I'll call it disordered, right? It's, it used to run on a pretty steady metronome. And so we could schedule things like that. The hardware industry doesn't work like that anymore, between public clouds, hardware accelerators, all these new architectures. So we said, well, if our job is to make life as easy as possible for a customer, then we have to be the ones to take the hit of all of that chaos and disorder. So we're going to set a steady schedule so that people can actually plan around it, right? Because if you're planning around, if you know when RHEL's going to land, then you can like anticipate budgets, you can anticipate your project plans and things like that. And it's kind of funny, when I started with RHEL, I always thought that it was going to be about calling balls and strikes on like which packages to ship in RHEL, and like yes, we should ship Wayland, or ship something else. And
fortunately, it didn't quite work out exactly like that. And I realized actually that the power in the product management work wasn't in the choice of packages as much as it was how the entire system works together. And it turns out that things like
the schedule are in fact part of the product. Like that is an intrinsic part of the value of the product. And so anyway, the steady cadence is kind of us acknowledging that.
Cool. And there is a fair amount of disruption going on in the hardware industry, right?
Really? Tell me more, Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me wax poetic about it.
Some $40 billion has moved around lately. What was that about?
Yeah. I couldn't help but notice.
Computer companies making their own chips. It's
you're absolutely right, Gunnar. The pervasiveness of hardware, the diversity of where it's landing and when, and it's just like NVIDIA just released like some new Tinker Toy chipset thing yesterday. It was like, oh my gosh, like there's a new thing, another new thing. It's like, wow, it is a very high intensity, and keeping up with just the hardware is hard enough. So having that established schedule, I feel like, is a value add, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and it's also not just the whatever it is, 5,000 hardware certifications or whatever it is that we've got. It's also the combinatorics of all of those different pieces of hardware, right? Because none of the things people buying are monolithic. It's like, the choice of each individual component, making sure all those individual components work together. All that stuff is all that homework is hopefully done beforehand, but before you install the RHEL, right? And that's actually our job, is to make sure that all that stuff is actually functioning correctly together.
Right.
So Gunnar, you mentioned choosing which packages are in or out of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And I think that ties into one of our other conversations that we've had in the past, which is we also made a decision with Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8 to make some changes to how we include or don't include packages.
Yeah.
So for those of us or those watching that may not know, we now ship software in addition to the operating system through a mechanism that we call application streams.
Was
Mr. Director of Product Management and Strategy.
Yeah. So here's the other thing that and I know this back when I was a sysadmin, here's a fun fact. Every major RHEL release has increased in size by 50%. And that's not because the job of the operating system required 50% more hardware each time we did a major release, right? The reason is it's interesting. People, yes, they want an operating system, but the actual operating system part of what we ship is actually a small fraction of of all the packages that are in the box, right? What happens is people begin to trust their operating system vendor to ship them software that works and that's going to get maintained and it's going to get patched. And So people use the operating system, yes, as an operating system proper, but they also use an operating system as like a library of dependencies that I can trust, right? So I don't have to go like roll my own Nginx or whatever. And so what people do is, that, they rely on the Python that we ship, or they rely on whatever, Ruby or Perl or like whatever the runtime is. We've struggled with that because on one hand, you have the operating system kind of lifecycle promises themselves extend out, 10 years, 13 years into the future. Right. If I had to run a 13-year-old Perl, I would die, right? Like that would be the worst. That'd be the worst. And so we kind of have to figure out how to balance the two things off. And we started experimenting with this back in earlier RHELs with things like software collections, and kind of app streams is kind of an evolution of the idea. It's the idea that we should carve out some space in the whole like RHEL ecosystem in this kind of like library of available software. We should set some of that stuff aside and say, okay, well, nobody's really going to need a 13-year-old version of Perl, or if they do, we can make other considerations for them. What you want most of the time is a runtime that kind of matches what the upstream community is doing kind of within reason, right? So exerting a little bit of stability, exerting a little bit of life cycle on it, but not giving it the full RHEL treatment. And so that's what AppStreams is about, is giving you the opportunity to get newer versions of the runtimes that you care about without having to homebrew them yourself.
Yeah, and there's kind of like two competing factions in system admin architecture world, and one is it's never fast enough, right? I need the latest. There's a .01 update to Node. I need that. Yeah. And then the opposite is like 10 years ago we made a thing. Yeah. And we can't touch anything because 10 years ago we made a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's the fun part is that those two people are the same person, because it's like everybody wants exactly like the very latest thing right up until you go into production, and then don't sneeze at it, don't look at it, don't touch it, just like leave it exactly the way it is, right? And obviously folks who have like thoroughly gone through the DevOps indoctrination and have gone, people who are in like DevOps mode obviously are in a different camp, but the vast majority of folks are still in that mode of like, I need to run as fast as I can right up until I release, and then hopefully nobody ever asks me to update this, right? Yeah. And so for those folks, that's exactly what AppStreams is meant to help out. Because if you're just running as fast as you can, you probably are homebrewing your own stuff, and frankly, there's very little that a Red Hat subscription would be able to offer you if you're just following, the head on upstream. Right. But if you want something that does have a little bit of stability, it's nice to have that kind of prepackaged and ready and already compiled to work with RHEL. So that's
like if you are pulling the source and compiling it yourself and deploying it, and then you don't touch it, well, what happens when there's a critical security vulnerability?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can't pull the upstream because now it's too far in advance of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And certainly you didn't fork it back in the day when you made this decision.
That's right. So that hasn't happened to me ever. But I hear stories about that being difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I wish I could say it never happened to me. But,
yeah, no, I know better.
Well, what I really like to see is kind of our practice as system administrators and kind of application development kind of makes a happy medium of that, because so about 2 years ago I was asked to update a piece of code at Red Hat that had been in production for 17 years that I had written in a weekend. And the reason that I was asked to update it was because like no one else knew how it worked, and it was written on this really old thing. It's like, if it's so critical to your business that you needed to have it, but why did we not touch it for 17 years? That's kind of sad and crazy.
Yeah.
And sad.
That feedback loop matters.
Yeah, and like honestly, we probably could have moved it to newer versions of the language runtime, and it probably would have worked fine.
Yeah, you just have to fix an error here or there. Yeah.
Right. And if we had done that every,
year,
3 to 5 years, I'm not even being as advanced as 1 year. We probably could have made
every
those
3 to 5 years. whether we need it or not. Like, let's just
Yeah, well, it's like
Yeah.
we'll make a couple of small updates, because after 17 years, I can guarantee you that now it's a big lift to
Yeah.
like fix all those accumulated changes that have happened.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see us get better at that. But one man's wish.
You're exactly right. I mean, RHEL's meant to, obviously we literally have customers who ask us for things like 30-year lifetimes on some of this stuff. And then on the other end, we say like, well, can't you just ship what's in upstream? And we're
Right.
like, well, we could, but like, what's the point? Like, it's like, you can go get it yourself. It's not that hard. And so it's letting people live in as much of the middle as possible, right? To introduce like just enough stability where it's useful without getting kind of decrepit, right? That's the balance.
So Chris, I have not been paying attention to any chat.
No, chat's
so
cool.
okay.
I'm good. I'll let
just
you
keep
know.
going then.
Yeah.
Where's my overhead light? Gunnar, I will get the answers out of you. So I know that we're not supposed to choose the child we love the most, but I definitely have a child I love the most. What's the thing that is most interesting and important about Red Hat Enterprise Linux to you?
So we talked about the cadence, and I think now that's actually probably my favorite feature, but that's connected to my second favorite thing, which is, again, along this lines of the product is only incidentally the bits. The product is everything around the bits for us. And so that's actually the ecosystem. So I think like if I look at the amount of work that goes into coordinating, like I say, like 5,000 hardware certifications and like umpteen thousand application certifications, and making sure that all of it, like the combinatorics of that, just boggle my mind. And the fact that it works at all is a wonderful thing, right? It is, and there's a small army of people inside Red Hat that make sure that all of those things work together. And the ability for us to do all that grunt work so that we can deliver as much option value to customers as possible. I think that's I think it's really cool. I remember when when I started with Red Hat, I worked with the government team, and I remember when I would tell these stories about like, oh, why RHEL is important, and I would talk about the size of the ecosystem, all the rest of it, and I would skip over it because I felt like it was boring, right? It was just like expected that an operating system would have a lot of hardware and it would have a lot of applications. But now that I'm kind of on the other side of the wire, and I can kind of peek behind the curtain and see literally hundreds of people that have to toil every day to make sure that all of this stuff actually works, I now have like a newfound appreciation for how actually hard that is. Not just on a single RHEL release, but we're maintaining multiple major RHEL releases at any given time, and then multiple minor releases inside that. I think at one point somebody told me we're running like 43 kernels concurrently at any given time, and so the ability to keep that ecosystem coherent across those 43 or whatever kernels is that's extraordinary. I mean, it's something I'm proud of anyway.
Yeah, and to add a little context to that, what many people I don't think understand is that we've got not just the major release, but there's dot releases that have a longer term maintenance cycle within it. So for example, RHEL 8.1 and 8.2 are what we call EUS, or extended update support releases. And we have those for RHEL 7 as well, and RHEL 6 as well, and RHEL 5 as well, at least for a little while longer. And so when something like a critical vulnerability comes out for, say, the Linux kernel, well, we've got to backport it not just to RHEL 8, 7, 6, 5, but all those dot releases that are still under maintenance support.
Yep.
So it's a lot. And I remember I was in Brno earlier this year and got the opportunity to talk to one of the kernel engineers, and man, it's a rough job. It's a rough job.
It is.
Yeah.
So
yeah, totally.
So one of the other changes that we did with RHEL 8 was changing the maintenance and a little bit on Lifecycle. So we talked somewhat on Lifecycle because we now have this predictable release cadence.
Yeah.
But one of the other things I found really interesting was that we've pre-announced all of the dot releases for RHEL 8
Mm-hmm.
and plotted them out on a
right.
rough calendar of
Yeah.
when they'll be released,
Yeah.
all the way through to 8.10, which is expected to be the last release of RHEL 8.
Yeah.
Was there a reason why you decided to do that?
Well, it kind of, the first follows from the other, right? Like if you're going to have a predictable cadence, and you're going to kind of call the ball, if I'm honest, that certainty in the schedule, it helps customers for all the reasons I just talked about, but it also helps us in our own resource planning, right? Like figuring out exactly like how many engineers need to be working on a particular thing at a given time. So now that the customer is certain, we're certain, we now have the ability to plan in a way that we couldn't before. And because we can now call the ball all the way out to the .10 release, that should be a comfort for folks who are. It's not unusual for customers when they're planning a new project, going through the whole life cycle and making sure that I know what my refresh cycle can be because I know when the RHEL releases are going to come. Right, that's a big part of the calculation. And so likewise internally, like we know when all the schedules are going to work out, and so we know what the staffing has to look like across each of these releases. So yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've experienced this when you were working in sales or not, but it's always disheartening when you're talking to a customer about, oh yeah, we're end of maintenancing this, and they're like,
yeah,
what?
Yeah.
But I have an app, and it's going to take $1 million for me to, engage the developers and like do all this stuff, and it's like, now when that's going to fall into your budget, right? And so
Right.
it's not a 6 month, we're in mid-cycle of the budget year for this customer surprise. It's like, hey man, it's many years away.
Yeah,
you have sufficient knowledge.
Well, and that's another reason why in 8 we made this huge focus on the in-place upgrades and tools like Leap and things like that. Or the upgrade Copilot work, where we're making it as easy as possible or as painless as possible for folks to move from one version to another, which is a behavior that's forced by that predictable cadence, right? Because now if we're on a 3-year window, it's actually in our interest to make sure the customers can move as quickly as possible through the chute, right? Because if people get backed up on a particular release, for us, that's a risk. For the customer, that's a risk because they're not able to take advantage of what's going on in upstream, all the new features and all the fun stuff. So that's bad for them. It's also bad for us because we get people piled up on a particular release and now we got to extend maintenance on it or whatever. Like if people get stuck, that's bad for both of us. So, and actually you're making me think about this. I'm going to revise my answer on what you said of what my favorite child is. I think this is one of the really nice things about selling a subscription as opposed to a software license, is that because it's a subscription, we have to be as happy with the customer has to be happy with the relationship they've got with us, just like we have to be happy with the relationship we've got with them. Because of the subscription, because every year they have to renew. In the government side, we used to say that every year is an election year for Red Hat, right? So you have to like constantly be campaigning and constantly delivering value, making it as easy as possible to do things like upgrade. Because if the customer fails or if the customer has a problem, that becomes a problem for Red Hat, right? Because the subscription model, the life cycles allow both Red Hat and the customers to have the same interest. And I think that's when we can make things work that way, I think everything works out better.
Well, I also work a lot with the in-place upgrade team and the engineers there, and they have a really strong desire to essentially get RHEL to the point of like phone upgrades, right? Where when you upgrade your handset, you just click a button
overnight.
It just works.
That's right.
And there may be some things that happen at the application layer that need to be updated, right? Because you get the like 30,000 little red dots saying that they need to be updated. But generally it all just kind of works because the functionality provided by the operating system just keeps going, right?
Right.
So I know that we're not there today, but that's certainly where they want to be in the future. And I will say that from when we originally released Leap in RHEL 8.0 to today, it has been evolving pretty rapidly over those first couple of dot releases. And if someone has tried it in the past and had issues with it flagging things as unupgradable, it might be worth a second look, because we've enhanced a lot of the logic and other stuff in there, and it'll continue to get better.
Yeah, and that's that in-place upgrade tool. That's a good example of, there's some operating system features which are like you just write them and then they're done and then they just work. And the in-place upgrade is a good example of one of those. It's not a feature; it's like a lifestyle. Like once you've committed to something like an in-place upgrade, like that is just an unending amount of work, right?
Yeah.
Like it'll never be done. So yeah, it will improve in the future for sure.
I'm sorry, did you say DevOps? What?
It's amazing.
So we've got a lot of RHEL out there. You talk to a lot of customers.
Mm-hmm.
What is something that you see people do that you're like, I really wish they would do this differently?
Oh yeah, I am really glad you asked me. Okay, this really grinds my gears. I'm ready.
Okay, here's the soapbox. Here you go.
Hey,
All right.
Serious face.
That's right. One thing that I've noticed. So here's a behavior that I've noticed is that, and it's actually we're actually also guilty of it. Is when people talk about how to use the operating system and how to improve it and things like that, the use case or like the persona is always like someone with a keyboard and a mouse interacting with the computer, right? That is still like in product planning. Like, that'll still seep in. Like when people think about like, oh, well, what do I need out of an operating system? That's kind of like what they have in mind, right? The number of people who like complain about the, GUI stuff on RHEL, right? Like there's still a lot of people who complain about GUI stuff. When the fact is that like the vast majority of RHEL is not managed from a keyboard or a mouse or even a person. Like the vast majority of RHEL is being managed by a robot somewhere. It's like a configuration management system or some provisioning system or something like that. And there's a lot of people who, for very good and defensible reasons, are still managing their RHEL, each one as like a separate snowflake, highly optimized. This like, okay, I'm gonna shape this operating system around this database and make sure that I'm getting all the perfect performance out of it and all the rest of it. There are so many good tools out there for automating deployments and managing gold images and configuration management. You might have heard of a little thing called Ansible, for example, or things like Satellite, or frankly any other management solution. If you are still handcrafting your operating system, do yourself a favor and start automating it. Even if it's just you, it's going to make your life easier. And reduce the number of errors and all the rest of that. So that's the first thing. And kind of connected to those two things is there's two kind of sleeper features in RHEL 8, which I really want more people to be taking advantage of. The first is called system roles. We took a bunch of Ansible modules and shipped them in RHEL. And to the point about in-place upgrades earlier, the idea here is that when you upgrade from one major version of an OS to another, one of the biggest, most painful things about it is not just the making sure your applications run and pass QE and all the other stuff. It's all the day two management changes as well, because like we do silly stuff like move etc files around and like change daemons and it's not called bind anymore and stuff like that, right? And so what these system roles do is give you one consistent interface that will be consistent across major releases for automation. So you have like one consistent way of managing time, one consistent way of managing whatever I'll just pick a web server, so whatever it is. SE Linux, another good example, right? And so you can be kind of inoculated from any kind of version to version changes. We create this kind of stability layer that we call system roles. It's kind of funny. We spend a lot of time in RHEL thinking about the ABI, right? The binary compatibility to make sure that applications that run on RHEL 7 will also run on RHEL 8. We spend a lot of time thinking about the kernel ABI, making sure that the device driver interfaces are stable so that we don't screw up the hardware enablement. And to date, we hadn't really spent a whole lot of time thinking about the third big audience for an operating system release, which is the actual operators themselves, right? And so this system roles is really a way of us creating stability to make life for those operators a little bit easier. And there's a third thing too, which I'll add, connected to all these things that we just talked about, including the in-place upgrade thing, is we just took Red Hat Insights, which has been around for 4 years now. It's
a while,
yeah, it's been a while. So this is a software as a service. At first, it was a way of logging into a website And if your systems were registered with Insights, we could give you like security vulnerability information, blah, 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 let you know if you had critical vulnerabilities or whatever. We've recently added a whole bunch of Insights features to do things like managing drift, for example. So you know if your systems have changed configurations, you know if your what your patch levels are, security vulnerabilities. I didn't do my homework, so I'm not going to like go through all the keywords, but there's now like an entire universe of new tools available for you if you have registered your systems with Insights. And the idea here is to make it as easy as possible to do that automation, to do that scalable management for RHEL, and not just on premise, but also in the cloud and elsewhere. So expect to see lots more great things coming out of that Insights platform. We're making a lot of investments in that in the future.
Yeah, John Spinks once told me a story about a customer that had this like bespoke setup with some database and some version of RHEL, and they just did a sample size of systems and put them into Insights, and it found like they've been working with the database vendor for months trying to figure out why this thing was happening, and like Insights found that, oh, there's an incompatibility between this specific kernel and this specific version of database. And yeah, like Insights just like bing, found it immediately. So yeah, those kinds of features are awesome for operators.
The way I explain it to customers is that the Insights is meant to be, it's an expert system that's built on 15 years of support cases that have come into us, right? And so like as long as we have seen a problem in the past, the goal is to make sure that we can identify that problem using Insights. So anyway, yeah, I think it's great. More people should use it.
I will say that thanks for dropping that bomb on me. Now I need to throw away our whole marketing campaign on RHEL, purveyors of bespoke artisanal Linux.
That's
right. Dang.
Wow.
Typical.
That's a game changer.
No, as a prior system administrator and professional services person, like I always likened being a really good system administrator to like being an airline pilot, right? Like pilots aren't up there like jockeying the stick and like messing with the throttle the entire flight, right? It's like they have autopilot and they have automations and they just kind of set it. And then they sit back and they like read their iPad, drink some coffee and, hang out. And it's kind of the point now where in a lot of cases, they're not landing the planes anymore, right? The autopilot takes care of all that. So if that's happening, if like most of flying is automated, then what's the point of having a pilot?
What's the point of having two pilots?
Right. Well, so what happens when that autopilot like freaks out, right? For whatever, there's solar flare or what have you. It's like you have that person to be like, oh, yeah, no, we're not over the airport right now. There's an ocean down there. Let me not land the plane at this moment. And that's what good system administrators should strive to be. It's like you could spend hours administering one box or 5 boxes.
Oh, yeah.
But if you spend some time up front to, build a layer of automation across that population, now when that population grows to 50 boxes or 500 boxes, you're not having to spend 100 times the amount of time that you were spending before, right? Or 10 times the amount of time you're spending before. Instead, you can sit back and kind of read your Kindle and drink some coffee and wait for your autopilot to land your plane. So.
Just watch out for the ocean.
Yeah, that's right. RHEL 9, just watch out for the ocean.
I will. So Gunnar, you grew up in Hawaii.
I did.
That is where I learned that you can never turn your back on the ocean.
That's true.
Because it will destroy you. Or standing at the beach and like somebody from my family was standing on the shoreline and they called me and I turned around and looked at them. And then when I turned back around, it was just a wall of water over my head. And it just picked me up and slammed me into the shore.
Yeah, you learn that at a young age. You don't ever turn your back on the ocean.
No. So there you go. RHEL 9, watch out for the ocean.
awesome.
So Gunnar, we also made a change to the how the life cycle is broken down between the different
Yeah.
versions. I didn't know if you want to talk to that at all, or
I did
just
want to
call
talk
it
to you.
good.
So yeah, totally. So I've been working. I'm almost 15 years with Red Hat, and I did not completely understand the Red Hat Enterprise Linux lifecycle policies. If you ever go to the lifecycle page, internally we joke about like the lifecycle page, and then everybody kind of like like everybody kind of laughs into their hands, because the lifecycle page is this used to be this impossibly Byzantine. Okay, well, if you're at this stage and you're in this phase, then you're getting these services, but then there's this 1 year of overlap where you're getting this but not this, and then you go into the maintenance phase, and then after that there's the extended lifecycle phase, and it's like, anyway, so like being a sysadmin meant
it
like,
also used to talk about like the third Thursday of the month.
yeah. That's right. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, it's, so suddenly if you're a RHEL admin, you're also an attorney, right? Is kind of what it felt like, right? And part of that was just like the accumulated complexity of us like saying yes to customer asks for 15 years, and it's just like, I'll characterize it as like business cruft. And so with the help of folks like Frank Varela, who's been indispensable on this, he's our kind of lifecycle product manager, and lots of other people, we were able to kind of simplify the rules a little bit and make them at least give a human a chance of understanding what the rules were. And so we did a massive content consolidation. So it used to be, I remember when I installed my first RHEL system, I was confronted with this like confusion of available channels, and they had very obvious names like optional, extras, supplemental, like I don't like,
maybe
those all mean the same thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Somebody went to thesaurus.com that day.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so you had all these channels, and then you had all these different life cycle phases. So you got a certain set of services in the 4th year through the first 4 years, and then a set of services in the 5th year, and then in years 6 through 9. I mean, it was a mess. So first thing we did was the content consolidation. So now there's fewer channels, and they're now hopefully all obviously named. So that was the first thing. I was
naming is hard though, but
naming is hard. First step towards naming is getting rid of things that you have to name, right? So that was the philosophy, right? It's just reduce the attack surface for confusion, if you like. And then the second thing we did was simplify the phases. So now it's first 5 years getting features, second 5 years only bug fixes. Easy. That's all you got to remember. So easy, even a director can remember it. So
director of what?
Dude, I often ask myself this question. Yeah.
Product marketing.
It's rarely clear.
Right. Good job.
Yeah. So those are the changes we made. So it's simplifying the content, the consistent cadence, and then simplifying the phases inside the life cycle.
So I'm about to ask maybe a difficult question.
Mm-hmm.
So like brace yourself.
I'm ready.
So if the first 5 years is features,
Yep.
we have a new RHEL release coming out every 3 years.
Correct.
At some point, there's going to be like multiple RHEL releases, all getting new features.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep. You're welcome.
How's that going to work, Gunnar? Is there going to be like riots in Red Hat engineering? Like what's going to happen?
Oh yeah, no, we have the rights. Yeah, no. Red Hat. No, the Red Hat Enterprise Linux engineering team has been extraordinarily indulgent with this requirement, is how I will put it. They have been. I mean, obviously, everybody's worried about having too much work to do and all the rest of it, but I think they're a combination of, we made some clever automation internally has helped with this a great deal. We did, as you know, Scott, we did a whole reordering of how product planning works over the last year and a half. And so between the automation, our new planning cycle, the new planning methods, and this promise, it looks like it's going to be okay. Fingers crossed. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, like I say, it's definitely more work for us, but the reason why we do it is so that customers don't have to, because if we didn't do it, then the customers would have to figure all this stuff out, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And
so it's important.
This is hard stuff. So
yes.
This is what we're here for.
That's right.
The hard stuff.
Speaking of hard stuff, Scott, are you
It's
gonna- are
now
you gonna
time
move
for the product demonstration. Oh,
Yeah,
what could
that's right,
possibly
yeah.
go wrong?
Oh, all right.
All right. So let me bring up our live product experience here. For anybody who hasn't seen it before, it's lab.redhat.com. And myself and other folks, including folks in engineering, all kind of contribute some labs running on live systems to showcase some of the features and things that Red Hat Enterprise Linux offers. So the one that I thought would be a good match for our guest today was managing software from an application stream.
Yes, that's a great one.
Yeah. So we let the system provision here for a second. And basically what it's doing is it's taking a system out of a pool of pre-configured systems and attaching it to the Red Hat subscription manager and doing a little bit of that kind of stuff while it's provisioning here.
Fun.
And when that message finally goes away, we'll have a live box to monkey with. And Chris, you've seen this as well because you use
I
this
have.
for.
We use Katacoda quite a bit at learn.openshift.com. So yeah, the number of lessons that you can get there is growing daily. Feels like. But
Yeah,
now we have our own little RHEL box.
Yep, we have our own RHEL box, and there are a couple. There's like an introduction to Ansible one that the Ansible team has put together. That's actually like 3 little RHEL boxes that you get to manage. So there's some more complex stuff, but generally our lessons all kind of deal with one box because we see these as foundational skills that as you get into larger layouts, like you just carry this skill set with you, and it all kind of works the same.
Nice.
Also, for those of you who may not have seen this before, any command that's got this little enter key character next to it is clickable. So I could type that command over here. Okay.
Is there any way to blow up that font?
Probably.
Oh,
Just 1 second. View. Zoom.
oh, you're on a Mac. It's just Command Plus.
Yes.
Yeah. There
How's
you go.
that?
That looks good.
Okay, our output's going to be all jacked up, but we'll figure that out too.
Oh, it'll be fine.
So I can type the command over here. Or you can click the button and it'll run it for you. So before I do this, let me just do a yum module list.
Oh, that's going to be short.
You know, it's a live box, so it pulls it from whatever's most available.
Okay.
All right, so Gunnar and I were talking about application streams and how we're providing multiple versions of things for folks now. And so there are some that are managed as modules, meaning they're like a set of RPMs that kind of get managed together, and there are some that are independent. So
Right.
for the purposes of, you know, kind of expressing this as a more useful thing, we're going to talk about the module ones. So all the commands are going to say yum module something or other. And for this lab specifically, we talk about Postgres. So down here in the list, eventually.
Gosh, alphabetical order and everything?
Yeah, man.
Wow.
We roll polished at Red Hat Enterprise Linux World.
Yeah,
All right, so there are 3 different versions of Postgres available for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.
Nice.
When it originally released with 8.0, 9.6, and 10 were available. And when Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.2 was released, Postgres 12 came into the mix as well.
Right.
So as the distro grows and continues on its life cycle, we will add these different versions of packages in here to help folks out. Ultimately, nice. I was mentioning how I'd like to see us move our craft of system administration and system architecture to kind of account for small changes over time. And this is one where it's like, if RHEL 9 came out today, right? Let me pause. RHEL 9 is not coming out today.
Right.
But if it were, it would have Postgres 12 in it, right? Because that's the most recently available one that we support. And so if you had Postgres 10 and you moved to Postgres 12 on RHEL 8, and then RHEL 9 came out, and it also has Postgres 12,
Right.
how big of a lift for your app would it be to move it over to this updated operating system, right?
Okay.
And so that's one of the things that I like about application streams is if you're more intentional about doing these small bites of maintenance over time, I think when it comes to that like big hunk of maintenance,
when you do go from 8 to 9,
right,
it gets a little bit easier.
Exactly.
A little bit. Yeah.
But in any event, so we'll continue to add new versions of applications and stuff as RHEL 8 continues up until that 5-year mark. So that would be 2024 is when we switch over to maintenance for RHEL 8. All right, so we can see those 3 different versions there. And if you want to install a version of it, notice that this one right here, is labeled as the default. So if I just did yum install PostgreSQL, it would choose
just
10.
Install 10 and off it goes.
That's right. So if you want to install a different version, that's where this kind of colon version number syntax comes in.
Okay.
So I'm just going to click this one because I'm lazy. And notice that it's running it here. And it goes ahead and installs Postgres. The module grouping for Postgres is the client and the server. So it installs both of those and then also the prerequisites for those. All right, and if we look at the yum module list again, this time I'll just look at those Postgres ones. All right, this one's enabled and installed.
Wow.
Because I said that I wanted 9.6. All right, and then we can just double check that it's there. All right, but
now is it running? Is it enabled? Is it like all set, ready to go kind of thing on restart? Or do we need to do those steps as well?
So we generally do not automatically enable software that gets installed on RHEL, right? Because just because you have it installed doesn't mean that you want it running, because if you have it running and it's a network service and other things, that provides additional aspects that you need to account for, right? Like ports and
firewalls.
Yeah, exactly. So this Postgres -- version, that was the client side, right? That's the client command that you use for connecting to the database that reported back that it was 9.6.10. So yeah, if I systemd systemctl,
you can do it.
Man, I can.
Nope.
Post, man.
Wow.
Why do you make me type things
off your mark?
All right.
Yeah.
So you can see that it's inactive and dead. All right.
Cool. No, I just wanted to make sure that people understood that just because you installed it doesn't mean it's on.
An excellent point to make, Chris. All right. So we want to do more of that bite-sized maintenance, right? So if we want to go from Postgres 9.6 to Postgres something else, we can't have more than one at the same time. So we have more than one at the same time. Which one is going to bind to its network port? Which one is going to use which libraries?
Which disk, all kinds of problems.
So the rule of thumb with application streams is you can have any choice of one that you want.
Just one.
But just one, right? So if we need to have Postgres 10 or Postgres 12 installed, we need to get rid of the Postgres 9.6. Now that creates some administrative work too, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't just want to remove Postgres 9.6.
No,
what happens to the database?
You don't just do that. Yeah.
Right. So, when making this move, there's other administrative things that one would want to do, like maybe back up the database or export it so that you can import it back when you get the updated version of the software installed. All right, but we're not talking about any of those administrative things. We're talking about the mechanics of working with application streams, right? So just the mechanics of application streams, we would remove the software that we no longer want, right? So again, I'm going to tell it specifically, I want to get rid of PostgreSQL 9.6.
And
so there we go.
Goodbye.
Yep, and we can make sure, right? PostgreSQL. Whoa, it's not even there anymore.
Yeah, it's gone. Now you really have to type. Yep.
Postgres, or actually
Mhm.
Right? Doesn't exist.
Gone.
All right. And if we look again at what our available Postgres's are, right, this one is available or enabled. This one is still the default, and we still have 12 out here. All right. But the important thing is 9.6 over here doesn't say that it's installed any longer.
Right. It has been deleted.
Okay. So because we installed this older non-default version and it was enabled, if I just did a yum install Postgres, guess what would happen?
You're going to get 9.6 again.
Yes.
Okay.
So we need to disable that and then enable the version we want.
Got it.
All right. So we're going to do this, and then that little E flag will
Turn
vanish.
one stream off, turn the other stream on.
Yep.
Makes sense.
So now we're back to getting 10. And if we look at the list, right, he's the default and enabled.
And enabled. Awesome.
Because we were doing 10 and 10 is also flagged as the default, we probably could have gotten away with disabling 9.6 and then moving forward.
Mhm.
But why do things halfway, right? So, all right. So then we can do our yum module install. Again, if we just did Postgres and didn't have any versioning information, it would probably choose the right one, but why take the chance, right? I like to be explicit when I tell it to do things. And now when we do a module list, it should show that module or that version 10 is installed.
There we go.
And if we do the Postgres version, right, version 10 is
10.14.
installed.
All right, nice.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. And we've got a whole bunch of available modules, not just for things like Postgres and Nginx.
Yeah, I was about to say, you've got Vert, you've got Varnish, you've got, I saw GIMP in there. I saw a bunch of stuff in there. Yeah.
Yeah, Node is one of the ones that I'm jazzed about a lot because I used to work in web development, and
Oh yeah,
was
Node
always
moves quick too. Yeah.
yeah, and it was aggravating. It's like, oh, we want to do this this feature, this JavaScript feature. Oh, but we can't because we have the wrong version of Node. So yeah, that's
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I had one of the companies I used to work for. I had a had a team that had a hard dependency on the latest version of Git. Like they needed Git version, like this was way back when it was like 1.9 something, right? Like, and the version that came with RHEL, I think it was 6 at the time, was like 1.0 something. And it was like, okay, so we're gonna now make our own RPMs for Git. This is weird, but okay, here we go.
Yeah, well, at least they decided to make their own RPMs instead of compiling from source and like, make installing.
Yeah.
Well,
they came to me and they're like, "Can we compile?" I was like, "No. We have a Yum repo. We're gonna make you an RPM. We'll put it there. It'll be done."
So I was on a professional services engagement for a smaller company, and their infrastructure had always been run by their development team, and they were all like super sharp guys, and they knew a lot of stuff.
Right.
But they had built all their boxes as like what Gunnar was saying earlier, right? They were artisanal, handcrafted, and so that was causing them problems over time. And I was asked to come and sit with them and redeploy their infrastructure in a more regular RHEL way, because we want to be able to go from 10 systems to 100 systems and not completely reinvent the wheel every time.
Right.
So we did that and got it all working, did some cross training, and then I left the engagement, right? It was over, moved on. And probably 3 months later, I get an email. Hey, this box isn't working anymore. Can you take a look? And they left all my credentials and stuff in place, which somewhat questionable, but okay.
Yeah, can kind of tell you that they hadn't done much with the box, probably. Yeah.
Right. So I look at the box, and it turns out that they had decided that they wanted to install ImageMagick on this box. So it turns out there is a version of ImageMagick that comes with RHEL. It has an RPM, and you can just install ImageMagick. Boom, there you go.
And then they'll be there,
But
probably.
no.
Yeah.
because they were used to doing everything in their own bespoke artisanal way. And so they'd pulled down the source code for ImageMagick and like make installed it. And it turns out that one of the libraries for ImageMagick overwrote a library used for package management.
Yes. Yes. I had this problem before.
Yeah. And now like RPM stopped working because this library was
like it broke the entire like RPM database or whatever. Yeah, because the library was out of whack.
And in reality, what happened was it like changed the LD config for the shared libraries. And so it wasn't even referring to the same location anymore. And that's what the problem was.
Yeah.
But it's like, guys, like literally yum install ImageMagick. That's all you needed. But, yeah. Anyway.
We put these things in the OS for you. They're here to help. They're here to help you.
Right. And well, so I asked the guy about it and I was like, hey man, why didn't you just install it from the configured repositories? He's like, well, because I always did it this way.
Well, yeah. And oftentimes people don't understand that there's a better way to do things, or not better, but a different way to do things. Right. Like
I would argue
this way might not be better for you, but this way is better for like that large, like cross section of the industry we're trying to cover, you know?
Yeah. And I would argue that not breaking the operating system is actually the better way of doing things.
Right. Like alternatives was one way. App streams is another way.
And for some things, we actually still use alternatives.
Yeah, exactly.
So for example, the Python. Python is one of those where we actually ship 2 different supported versions for reasons.
Lots of reasons. Yeah.
Yes, much reasons. But so you can see that we actually named it differently, right? There's Python 2.7, Python 3.6, Python 3.8. And one of them will be set to the systems Python, and we still use alternatives to do that.
Right.
But yeah, hopefully folks will
as Conan Kudo in chat says, there are advantages of using app streams. It makes installation of software management much simpler, and leveraging that software as a developer is way easier.
That is the hope.
And that's the goal, right? Like grease the skids, make life a little bit easier for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And give you support when something goes bump in the night.
So Gunnar mentioned that Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.3 is, what was it? Morally certain that it's going to be in November.
Yeah. I'll have to go back and get the quote on that one.
Yeah. So be on the lookout for some more versions of things to come into application streams, because while in Red Hat Enterprise Linux world, 6 months is probably not a very long time. In the open source world, 6 months is a lot of time, especially for things like Node or Nginx, where they're coming out with updated versions.
Anything, yeah. Awesome.
So
you'll be back here when? When are you going to be back on the air?
So next show is in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yes, I have tentative guests, so this is not locked in yet, but I'm like,
you got 2 weeks.
85% sure.
Yeah.
So not quite the morally certain.
Not quite the morally certain, but almost. So if you like the show, let us know. If you want to see somebody on the show, let us know. You can always find me at Chris Short on Twitter. cshort@redhat.com is my email. As always, very thankful to have you watching today. And please join us in 2 weeks for the next Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents.
Oh, you don't want to do a teaser? I see how it is.
I mean,
85% is enough for Chris Short.
I mean, if you want a teaser, go ahead. But like, I know that 85% in today's world is not like 85% in any other world.
So I'm fairly confident that I'll have at least one of the editors for the Enable Sysadmin community to come on.
Beautiful.
We can talk to them about the Enable Sysadmin. And the practical that's going to go along with that is they often produce articles that are like the 10 best insert function here, right? 10 best system administration tools, 10 best retro games on Linux. So I think I'm going to go through and just talk about those 10 best system admin tools they most recently featured. And why one cares.
That's cool. I like that.
So yeah,
that'll be great.
And maybe I'll even slip in 1 or 2 of my own. Maybe it'll be like 12 and a half best.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Maybe I can drop one in. Make it 13.
What? 13 and a half?
13 and a half and a quarter.
So
13 and 3/4.
3/4 of an important command.
Right. Give me the 3/4 command. All right, Scott. It was great having you on. It was great having Gunnar on. Thank you, Gunnar, for coming. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone. 2 weeks.
Bye, everybody.